Hi again. Unitarian Universalists believe in the inherent dignity and worth of every person. We are tolerant and accepting of others, even those that think differently from ourselves. We believe in bodily autonomy. This means a person has the right to make their own decisions about their body without coercion or interference from others. This also includes your contraceptive choices. Unfortunately, the current political climate has not been favorable to reproductive rights. Reproductive rights are not just abortion rights. And this is something that we will learn when we have our guest speaker from Planned Parenthood speaking today also, Elizabeth Molina. As most of you know, on June 24th, 2022, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization and overturned Roe v. Wade. This ruling removed all federal and constitutional protections for abortion, and it has impacted abortion access for the whole country. In 14 states, abortion has been banned outright. Many more have enacted severe restrictions, making abortion care extremely difficult to find in more than half the country. As of June 2024, 14 states have near total bans on the abortion pill, I can't pronounce this one, mifepristone. These unjust laws have forced many abortion seekers to travel hundreds of miles to get the abortions they want and need. Many families don't have the time or the money to be able to do this. Also, in addition to not being able to get abortions, many obstetricians and gynecologists in the states that have abortion bans have left the states. And there also have been decreased residencies in those states for those OBGYNs. And this has especially affected the rural areas of the United States. Too many persons have been forced to continue pregnancies against their will, endangering their lives and sacrificing their reproductive health. Too many persons are unable to find an OBGYN near their home, and this has also impacted their health and their lives. Here's a few abortion statistics. 1 in 4 cisgender women will have an abortion by age 45. Over 55% of people who have abortions are already parenting a child, and a third or two have more children. 75% of people having abortions say they are unable to afford a child. As you can see, reproductive justice is a constantly changing landscape in the United States. As Unitarian Universalists, we need to stand for reproductive justice. I am closing with a poem by Alice D'Obeville titled Well-Being. I am blessed and sacred to be capable of creating miracles that outlive me, but I'm also a soul who seeks discovery, pleasure, and glee. I am strong but vulnerable. Whilst living within institutions built by men who believe that the beat of my heart isn't as important as that of a group of cells, I fight for reproductive justice, for when my body follows instructions, but my soul desires freedom and my world is put at risk, I can keep a hold of the reins and preserve my own health, because my well-being goes beyond that of a choice. It spans throughout the community that is my sanctuary, the spirituality that is my strength, and the access to economic and political security. My independence is what allows me to fly. My body is what allows me to thrive. Reproductive justice is what enables me to live, because abortion is self-care. Thank you.
Good morning. For 18 years, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and I were very close friends. Well, she'd been dead for a few years by the time I started portraying her in the 1980s, but she felt as alive and relevant to me then as she does now. So how did I come to travel with this one-woman show across the country, and what drew me to her story? I've been performing since I was 3 years old when my parents enrolled me in ballet school. I was captured by performing right away, and I've spent 50-plus years doing just that in some capacity or another, moving from dance to music to commercial voiceovers to theater. After college, I was part of a theater company in the western suburbs of Chicago. One of our members had written and performed over 10 years 7 different one-woman shows in an effort to help passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. But now she was having health problems, and she was not able to continue to travel and perform. So she handpicked 7 women from our theater company, gave us her scripts and her costumes and her contacts. We all read the scripts, and what was remarkable was that all 7 of us chose a script different from the others. That was amazing. Margaret's story stood out for me, and I wanted to bring her to life. When I began, I performed the script I'd been given, but curious, I started reading about Margaret's life. First, her autobiography from 1938, and 2 biographies published in 1979 and 1992. All of these, while covering the same facts, took different approaches, certainly writing them from the climate of the time they were written. Born in 1879 to a poor family in upstate New York, Margaret was one of 11 surviving children, although her mother had 25 pregnancies. Although she stated later that every baby in her family was wanted and loved, she realized as a young woman working as a visiting nurse in New York City that this was not true in most of the cases she saw in the poorer neighborhoods. It was nursing women after self-induced abortions that gave her resolve something had to be done. At that time, condoms were available, but only to men. Women did not have access to them at all. These were provided to contain syphilis. Avoiding pregnancy was not even considered. Neighborhood abortionists were available to women along with a variety of herbal and physical remedies, such as throwing yourself down a flight of stairs to induce a miscarriage. Knitting needles were often used. In fact, the woman that turned her into an activist was a patient that she had nursed back to health after a self-induced abortion. When she was called back to the same house a few months later, the woman bled to death, and Margaret was done. Then she started her crusade, opening a makeshift office in the city where she dispensed birth control information, the little that she had. She wrote articles in The Call to recommend that women take the responsibility for their health themselves. She may have also recommended overthrowing the government, which got somebody's attention. Charged with a violation of the Comstock Act, by the way, has anyone heard of that law lately? Yeah, they just overturned abortion rights in Arizona because of the Comstock Act, which was written during the Civil War. Well, at this point, Margaret knew she was in trouble and fled to England by way of Canada to avoid prison. There she met Havelock Ellis in London, who taught her everything he knew about birth control and sent her off to the Netherlands, where the laws and their attitudes about sexual autonomy were quite different than they were here in the United States. And they had the most advanced technology, including a very early form of the diaphragm. She was excited by all she had learned, and she waited till things calmed down here before she sailed back. She did end up serving time for her violation of sending lewd articles through the mails. But once out of prison, she resumed her work lecturing and setting up Planned Parenthood offices throughout the country. At one lecture in Boston, the police chief stated, "If Margaret Sanger speaks tonight, she will be arrested." So she went to the lecture, put a large piece of tape over her mouth, and handed her speech to her aide. She worked the rest of her life lobbying government to change laws to ensure women's reproductive health. As a rather new feminist in my 20s, I enjoyed portraying her, leaning into the issue that Margaret always felt was at the heart of her work: women's agency over their own bodies. I toured the country performing for nurse practitioner conventions, Girl Scout troops, universities, UU churches, and Planned Parenthood affiliates. Most times I was invited in early and was able to meet with several of the people who worked on the front lines from Anchorage, Alaska to Tampa, Florida. They told me stories of the women they treated and how they navigated between healthcare, the law, and the attitudes in the culture. The Latina nurse who treated a pregnant Mexican woman in Salinas was talking with her patient. The patient asked her how many siblings she had growing up, and the nurse said 2. The patient asked if there was something wrong with her father. And the nurse said no, he wanted a good life for them and knew he couldn't provide that if there were more than 3 children. The patient took that in and then said, "Oh, no wonder we're so poor." I was performing at Boise State University, and the professor that booked me told me that a young girl had been murdered recently. She'd become pregnant through sexual abuse from her father. She took the bus to Washington State, where she could receive an abortion without parental consent, and when she returned home, he killed her. When I was at the nurse practitioner convention in Atlanta, I met a doctor who ran a family planning clinic in South Carolina. I asked him how he managed to stay open, and he said, "Oh, they threatened to firebomb my clinic. I told him to go ahead. I would just move my clinic into a downtown hotel." He said to me, "You know, they're all against abortion until it's their wife or their daughter or their companion. And they want to come in the back door when it's dark, and they don't want any records." I told them that if I have to set up my shop somewhere else, I will never name them, but I'll start writing articles for the town newspaper, and I will describe you so well that they will all know you've been here. He said, "You know what? They leave me alone." I heard these stories and many others 30 to 40 years ago and thought by now, certainly, we would have moved past all of that. But I can still see all these stories and more happening in this new century. I was angry and saddened when Roe v. Wade was overturned. But as my professor, Dr. Sharon Welch, the foremost feminist theologian in the country, stated in her book, The Feminist Ethic of Risk, that you can change laws, but if you don't change the culture, there's almost a certainty that the issue will revert to what it had been before. We saw that with Roe, and we may see that with marriage equality too. So as religious people of faith, what can we do? What avenues are open to us that can make a real difference? Costco has Plan B pills that you could buy at low cost to have available if the Comstock law is used to prevent shipping from manufacturers. And you don't need to have a membership. You can just walk in and ask for the pharmacy. Advocacy work is most needed even in these tumultuous times when there is so much to do and, frankly, finite energy on our parts. UU ministers have asked to reestablish partner churches in abortion-available states who could take in women from states where abortion is illegal. These networks could be set up quietly between those in both congregations who would be willing to be a lifeline for these women. Some of these tasks are easy and require little money, but some are riskier depending on what happens in our country in the next few years. If it feels as if there's an attack on women, let me assure you, there is. We are people of faith, and in our theological principles and purposes, we can lean into the inherent worth and dignity of all persons and the belief in the democratic process. Women should not be dying because of lack of basic health care, and the belief that all babies need to be born, no matter how damaging that may be to the mother or the child itself. But where is the work to make sure these babies are loved, cherished, and provided for after birth? Margaret said that she lived long enough to see laws change, science advance, but the biggest obstacle to her always was the attitude in our culture that when a woman becomes an agent of her own body, that she becomes impure. How insulting. There is an alarming step backwards in our culture. I fear that many more women will die because some men in our political landscape have decided that reproductive health is not important. Let's all prove them wrong. I leave you today with Margaret's own words. Leave the world a better place because you, my child, have dwelt in it. To the glory of life.